everyone, I'm Allie Buchman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to do a little wire working project for you today using some of these awesome little faceted high-end gemstone. They're going to be using some wire and some gemstones, and you will have some tools handy. If you do need any of the materials to make these earrings or ones similar, you can get them from us at PotomacBeads.com, shopping online, or visit our stores to pick up the materials there. We will have a little drop down here on the left-hand side to give you links to all the different materials if you do need to get them. For these gemstone wire earrings, I am using these little faceted gemstones. You can really choose to use anything along the front. The thing that I like about this strand, which is about 3.5 millimeter size, and if you are looking to purchase with us, its number to search, the item number is 140014. It comes with this variety of color and actually a little bit of variety of size when you're getting that small and faceted. The nice thing is it gives you a lot of opportunity from one strand to make a lot of different pairs of earrings. I have one here that I just kind of picked a color from each of the different colors that were included in the strand that I took apart. And then I also have a purple sitting here for you that's kind of gradient, and a beachy blue sitting here as well, just to show you what's in the mix and what you can pick. I could have gone with greens and gone with that as well. You really can do these any size as well as any amount of gemstone. In addition to that gemstone strand, I am using 18 gauge square wire. I could also use 20 gauge round wire. Either works. I just happen to have this sitting here, so I am using the 18 gauge square. It also gives it a fun, shiny effect as you're working with it. In addition to my 18 gauge, because the gemstones are small, we're going to actually have to wrap these onto our wire. Our ear wires are going to be one consistent spot here, or one consistent piece of that 18 gauge, and we're going to wrap the gemstones in place with 24 gauge wire, which will easily fit through the holes of these gemstones. In addition to my 2 gauges of wire, my 20 square and my 24 round, again, you could use 20 round and you could use 22 round as well, so you can play up the sizes. When it comes to the actual ear wire portion, you're not going to want to do it with anything less than 20 gauge. You can go up to 18, it makes them a little bit thicker, but this 20 gauge square or the 20 gauge round is going to be ideal to actually go through your ear hole when you're working and creating these earrings without really stretching them out or hurting them, which you don't want to do while you're wearing. In addition to the 20 square and the 24 round, I do have a couple tools sitting here. I have my hammer and mallet. This is used for the very ends of the earrings, because we're going to hammer down the very end so that way the gemstones don't just slip right off. It also gives it a fun look. It has a more teardrop shape if you are using the round wire versus the square wire. So I have a hammering block here, which is just a stainless steel block, and then I also have a hammer here that has a flat end. I am working on a bead mount, which I think is important when you're working with wire, because you do cut the wire a little bit and that will catch the wire that you're working on and have it not fling across the room. In addition to these materials, when you are cutting, I like to use a flush cutter. I'm always going to use that flat side closest to my project. I have a nylon jaw plier here, which helps kind of straighten out the wire in the back. If you're not really familiar with wire working, or this is your first attempt, this is a great little tool to have, because it is going to straighten out the wire that you might get kinks in without actually creating divots in the wire. I also have my bent needle nose pliers. You can use a regular needle nose. I just prefer that bent needle nose as I'm working with it. To get started, I did take all those gemstones off and created a pattern that I wanted to see happen. So I have this pair here, which I made, and they are about 1.5 inches in length, and then the ear wire portion actually goes a little bit longer, so you see it from the front. The second pair that I make to show you how to do step by step, I will actually be cutting that a little bit shorter so you don't see that, and maybe making them a little bit longer in the front so you can really play up with the design. The one thing you do want to do is make sure that your earrings are consistent from ear to ear. So I'll help and go through with you how to make sure that is accurate. If you do want to make them consistent, you may also want to have a little ruler handy so you can measure out your wire as you're cutting. To get started with my earrings, what I'm going to do is cut 2 equal pieces of my 20 gauge square wire. You can play around with the size that you want the earrings to be, but you want to cut more than you think you would need. If you know the exact size and you measure them, you can cut the wire to the exact length because then you don't need to cut off any. I'm going to cut my wire about 3.5 inches off my spool here. And with my wire cutter, I'm just going to trim that wire. I'm going to do my next piece of wire the exact same length. So again, if you have a ruler, you can get that ruler out, or you can just come right to the first piece that you cut. Use that as a ruler itself. Make sure those ends are flush and cut down on the end of the wire where it meets the other one. Once I have those 2 pieces of my 20 square, or 20 round if you're using that, I am done with that thick wire. So you really don't require much. If you are doing these, 20 gauge sterling would actually be really nice to make sure that no one has ear allergies, and also you use such a little piece that it really is quite cost effective when you're working with that. So if you are doing it, if you do want to use 20 gauge round, that would be a good suggestion for the sterling silver. I want to one more time just make sure that my ends match. So I just have a hair bit longer on one side. I am going to trim that down, that flat side towards the project, and then put those down. I'm going to pick up the 24 gauge now, and I'm going to cut about 7 inches of that 24 gauge wire. If you know you want to do a lot of coiling, going the whole way up to the bend of the ear wire, you want to cut some more of that. You can easily add wire and make it pretty hidden, but I'm going to get that right at the beginning, so that way, the length right at the beginning, so that way I don't have to cut and add additional. My second piece of wire then, I'm going to do the same thing. A lot of wire working has increased, I think, inconsistencies in the project, especially with earrings from side to side. I really like a nice, elegant, very professional look when it comes to wire working. So I try to make sure that everything's the same size right away. When you are making the earring, because we're cutting at the same time, and this is why I'm doing 2 complete earrings and not showing you how I did one and then making the other one for this set, you do want to start out doing the same steps at the same time. So I have my little piece of plain wire here of my 20 gauge square, and I have my 2 pieces of 24. I'm going to set the 2 pieces of 24 down for a second, and I am going to get my 2 pieces of that square 20. I'm going to bring my hammering block there centered. It'll be a little bit hard to see for you guys because you're going to be seeing the head of the hammer, but I wanted to make sure to get nice and close. When I'm going down and I'm hammering that end in order to catch my wire, with the square wire, you're going to want to make sure to sit it flat. Square wire is exactly like it sounds. It's completely squared. If you're using the round wire, it doesn't really matter how you hit it as far as what end is facing up. I want to make sure that the flat side is facing up and that it's not at a quarter. And just at the very, very end tip, like 1/16 right there, I'm going to flatten it out by hammering it down. This is going to flatten it out and flare out that end. You can see that reflectiveness. And again, it's just about a 1/16 of an inch. So that's going to catch the end of the wire from falling off. So you don't have to bear listen to that hammering again. I'm going to do the second one the exact same way off camera, and then I'll catch up with you guys in order for us to add our 24 gauge and our gems. As I finish with my mallet here, I want to make sure that my ends look similar as far as the length that's being hammered, as well as the size of the little teardrop that's created at the end. If you do have a little rough end that is created on any of these, you can take a simple emery board and kind of sand that out, or a metal file if you have that to round that out a little bit more as well. Once you have those pieces, you can move your hammering block off to the side. We do use it at the very end then, but right now we're going to move it off to the side and work on coiling and wrapping. To coil and wrap the project, I'm going to start at the very base of the project. I'm holding the portion there that creates that little paddle end, and I'm going to take my 24 gauge wire, intersecting with a 20 gauge and leaving myself a 1/4 of an inch there tail. I take the 24 gauge wire and I'm going to coil 2 times around the end of that wire. So the 24 is wrapping around that 20 gauge. I'm going to go back and push the tail towards the previous loops and just wrap one more time. So there'll be 4 little coils there at the end. I want those coils nice and tight, so when you see them at the end, it's really just an action, a little added display piece, but I really want to focus on the gems. Once I have that little end, I'm going to keep on there for now so I can hold on to the wire, but eventually I will cut that down. I want to slide that wire then down onto the paddle where it stops. So it's just going to stop right in there. After I have those 3 coils on, I get to add my first gemstone. Because the gemstones have small holes, I am going to be adding them on the thinner wire. If you do have a gemstone that has a fairly big hole, you could drop it right down onto the end of the wire. I'm going to pick up my beads here. And the first color I have, I'm going to do 1 set at a time. So I had them laying out kind of here in a pattern. And I'll pick up that first bead. I want to keep it to the front of my wire. So I'm going to pull my wire up a little bit so it's right there at the front. I use my fingernail or my hand to hold that bead in place and make sure that it stays at the front of the project. I'm going to coil it around 2 times, coil that 24 gauge wire, and come out right at the top of the wire there. You can see that crystal is sitting a little bit off. I'm going to turn it so that way it sits right to the front. It's a little bit hard to do it for the camera. Once you have that gemstone sitting right on the top and you have 2 coils, your wire comes back to the top and I'm going to add my next gemstone. Once I have that on, I hold that gemstone in place there and I'm going to coil again 2 times around. Once, twice, and bring the wire back up to the top. Once that wire is back up to the top, I'm going to add my next gemstone. So it's a very simple pattern of adding the stones in the order which you want. The gemstones are going to take an order on this first one, and then we'll switch over and do the same order on the second. If you want to, you can go in with your fingernails or with the pliers and just kind of press those coils together to make them nice and tight. So when you look at the example, the gemstones really sit to the front and those coils are nice and tight next to one another. I'm going to do the same thing, holding the gemstones in place and coiling right along the top here 2 times, and then I'll get ready to add my next gemstone. Continuing up, I'm going to add 4 more gemstones, 4 or 5 more gemstones, and then I'll show you how we get ready to finish this off and add the gemstones to the second little paddle here. I'm here at the end adding my gemstones, and I'm just going to go in and take that extra wire and coil the complete piece around. This is just going to give a different look of that coiled end, making sure that it's nice and tight. And stop before I have the actual end wrapped. Now I'm going to go into the second piece here and do the exact same thing in the exact same order of gemstones. To start that again, I pick up my paddle bottom here. I take my 24 gauge wire, leave about 1/8 of an inch, and coil that 24 gauge right around that 20 square. Slide it down a little bit into place and go back and wrap that tail. Again, it's all about consistency. There's 4 wraps on this one here, so I want to make sure that I also have 4 wraps on this one right at the bottom. This is also a great project to do some liver of sulfur with and put that right on the end. because that makes the coils kind of stand out. So you can take some liver of sulfur right along the back and paint that on. Once I have my wire on here, I'm going to go back to adding my gemstones in the same manner. Drop the gemstones onto the 24 gauge wire. Hold that gemstone in place. Bring the wire down right next to the gemstone and wrap 2 times. If you need to push those wraps together, get ready when it's at the top here to put the next bead on. And if you need to and your pile kind of gets disheveled, or in my case it's just kind of down here at the bottom and it's light, so it's a little bit out of frame on the blue mat, you're just going to look back and make sure that you're doing the same pattern as you did on the previous earring. Hold that gem in place then again, and same thing, bring the wire right down next to the gemstone and coil 2 times. I always coil away from me. I find that's the easiest to hold, but whatever works for you. And then again, continuing on, adding these gemstones. If you do notice that it has, you have problems getting the gemstones on, the holes will be a little bit inconsistent. Before you start your project, you may want to poke through whatever gemstones you're using and make sure that all the gemstones do fit on your wire, especially if you only have one of certain ones. The other thing you can do is while you're working, sometimes the end of the wire will get rough a little bit. So you can go in with your wire cutters and just trim down a tiny little bit on the end, so that way it creates still a nice flush cut for you to put the gemstones on. So again, continuing on that pattern to make it the exact same as the previous pair, and then I'll show you how we end it and we actually get our bends. Now that I'm done coiling my 2 pieces, because the gemstones are a tiny bit difference in size and your hands kind of work differently as you work with each piece of wire, I want to lay the 2 right next to each other and make sure my gemstone portion is the exact same length, so that they're starting the same area and they're ending the same area. I also want to make sure that I have consistent coiling on each one so they look the same at the ends. On this one here, I notice that I have one more coil at the end, so I'm going to pull that off a little bit. If you do need to trim down the wire, you're just going to grab your needle or your wire cutters here, trim the wire as close as you can to the end on all sides. And you want ideally the wire to kind of end at the back of the project. Once you have them trimmed, then you can take your pliers, just kind of pinch down those edges. Once you have those edges pinched down, you should have a lot of consistency between the 2 portions of these paddle bottoms and the gemstones that are on them. I have my hammering block back out now, and what I'm going to do is hammer down the ends just a little bit to make sure that they are flared enough that this won't come off the bottom. To do that, you're just going to pick up your hammer and mallet. Try not to hit those coils. If you do, it's not a big deal, but you want to just flatten out that end tip just a tiny little bit more to hold that in place. Do the same thing on the other side. Just a tiny little bit more. If you do hit the coils at all, you can go back with your pliers and just kind of pinch the ends of that wire just a little bit. Now that you have the consistency between the 2 pieces, what we're going to do is actually determine their length. In the set here that I did with the mixed gemstones, you can see I left a little bit above my gems before it went into the ear. I could bend these directly after. I could leave more space. I'm going to keep them nice and simple and very wearable and bend them right after the coils. To do that, I'm going to go, like I said, right after the coils, hold with my bent needle nose pliers here, hold my beads and my coil. You can see I have just a tiny bit of space above there, and I'm going to bend that extra wire towards the back. Creates a V. I'm going to do the same thing on the other piece, holding just that little tiny bit above the coil and bend, creating that V. Again, you want to look at them at this point, make sure they're consistent in length. You can see this one has a tiny bit longer end, so you can either take a file to file that down, or you can just take your pliers here and trim that down just a little tiny bit. Once I have that consistent, I will go in now and create the back. You can also go in and hammer it out a little bit more, the other one, to make it longer. Towards the back here, you can use your fingers or your nylon jaw pliers if you're not very used to playing with wire. I like to use my fingers, and what I'm going to do is get that rounded effect. This will help it so that it sits nicely in the ear and curves a little bit on the outside, as well as stays towards the front. If you put it in your ear like this, obviously it's going to kind of be awkward and hit your neck. Towards the back of the ear wire, I'm just taking my hand and I'm curving out that wire. Again, if you do want, you can take your nylon jaw pliers and you can curve out that wire as well. And just kind of pull it through there and create that curve, giving some tension. I'm also at this point going to curve just a little bit using my hands that coiled section of gemstones that I did. So I have that bend going on. I want to do the same thing on the other one, making it consistent. So I'm going to bend those gemstones a little bit like I did on the other one. Sit it down, make sure I have that curve identical, and then come to the back here, either use your hands or your nylon jaw pliers to kind of curve that back. Once you do that, we're going to determine which length you want the back of your ear wires to be. Because I did this one long, I'll cut these a little bit shorter. I'm going to line them up, pick up one, and I'm going to have it end about 3/4 of the way down that little gemstone coil. Take my pliers with that flat end going towards the project, cut off that extra piece of wire. With the other project, I'm going to take that extra piece of wire, since they were a consistent length, and use that as a measuring tool to cut off the other side of the wire. Just to line them up, I'm going to make sure that those ends end identical, which they do. Bend them towards the ear wire just a little bit more to get the shape that you want. Then I'm going to take my needle, or my bent needle nose pliers. At the very end, because these are shorter, I'm just going to turn them out just a tiny little bit to look like an ear wire. That way they stay on your ear a little bit better. And then you have it. You have the fun, really one-of-a-kind look of that coiled whole set of ear wire where you're doing everything by hand. It makes a really nice project and a really nice way to use some of these faceted high-end gemstones. You get a ton on a strand. You can make all different patterns and really play up the designs with different lengths, different bends. You could square it off as well. So it just gives you some ideas how you can use the wire and the beads to create a process of your own in order to make these awesome little earrings. If you do need any of the materials, again, back at the beginning of the video, we have a little drop down, or right underneath this video here, there's a details section that says what the video is about, and there's a little kind of arrow down. You can press on that and it'll give you links to shop with me online if you'd like. As always, have fun using these. You can also become interactive with us by subscribing to this channel, so that way you do get regular updates on products and different projects that we do, as well as join us on Facebook. For our Facebook group, we have our regular Facebook page, and then we also have a group that you can join. You can interact with us as well as other beaders and designers to get ideas, help answer questions, and really just become more knowledgeable about the craft. And that is beading and jewelry making. So you can log on, we'll accept you there, and you can follow us there as well. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have fun making lots and lots of sets of these little gemstone coiled earrings.